Okay, here we are. So, welcome everyone. I'm here today. Actually, let me say who I am. I'm Regina Curtis, and I am the creator and founder of At Maytree. I'm a soul wisdom mentor and a soul source business strategist. And I'm joined by LaChelle Amos. So, LaChelle, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm LaChelle. I am a heart wisdom leader, a conflict transformation expert, and the founder of Silence of Sound Yoga.
A founder, huh?
Yeah.
You and your alter ego.
I'm like, it's all this visionary dreamer that I am, right? It's like all these iterations of what my business is soon to become.
It is. I love it, and it's constantly evolving, right? So today we are going to be talking about intentional action and sustainability, and we're talking about that through the lens of how that shows up in our business ecosystem. So let's talk about, first of all, what is a business ecosystem? Um, and I can start with what my vision of that is and what that means to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, LaChelle. So when if I think about my time in a corporate world, right, or in academia, I've spent some time in both. There is an ecosystem already built into the structure of those businesses. So if I think about in a corporate space, there's a marketing team, there's an IT team, there's an accounting team, there are people who do product development, there's a sales team, there are these different teams, right, that each play a different role or a different function in the overall health and well-being of the company. And in some cases, there are things are outsourced, right? Like we need to bring in resources from outside of the company, and that's a part of the ecosystem as well, right? You can think of that in terms of, so you have I like to use nature as a resource for this. So if you think of an ecosystem like a bog or a desert, for instance, right? There are certain characters that play different roles in those ecosystems. We also have things that come in from outside of that small bubble that is the constant. So rain may come in at times, even in a desert where rain isn't a part of the ongoing day to day, every day. Um, it still does come in sometimes, and sometimes foreigners come in, right? Like we have animals come in from a different, like wander in from a different place, or we have people who come in that aren't a part of that. And how does that ecosystem then continue forward? How does it react to these different energies that are coming in, or these different species? And in our business, that happens too, right? We have different energies that come in, we have different forces of nature that come in, and we have to be able to react to that. So I'm going to stop there for a moment, and I'm going to let you respond to that and see how does that sit for you.
Yeah, that's a good analogy for it. When you were sharing for me, it's also about like just reflecting on kind of where I personally am and understanding that like there's different iterations of our business, right? And so the
Hold
ecosystem, no
on.
matter.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you. Can you unplug and plug your earphones back in? They're making kind of a weird sound.
Is that better?
Speak again.
Yeah. I
It's just
hear
kind of like crackly. I don't know.
I hear that as well, but I heard it when I unplugged also.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. Well, let's keep going.
Okay.
We can
Well,
hear you. It was just like sometimes it helps to plug and unplug, but all right. So when you think of your own ecosystem, sorry that I interrupted you.
it's okay. Um, Yeah, even within a set kind of ecosystem or environment, like there are different iterations of that end up showing up, right? Like I mean, it's this evolution process, and transforming and redirecting and growing and expanding, and all of that is equally a part of that ecosystem. And that's where we start to get into how that growth and evolution becomes sustainable.
Yes, exactly, right? That's exactly it. So, first, understanding your ecosystem. Like, what are the strengths of your ecosystem and what are the opportunities for support? And when you have that awareness, then you can really bring in, expand that awareness more into how do you make that sustainable? And so LaChelle and I were connecting before we got on this live broadcast, and we were talking about how sustainability is not something that gets implemented necessarily overnight, right? The intention to create sustainability, whether it's in your business, in your natural ecosystem, in your body, in whatever way you're bringing in sustainability, it is something that you're bringing awareness into and making a decision about consciously. But that process of making it sustainable is an ongoing thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's also like as you were speaking, I mean, being a heart wisdom leader, like for me, I relate things in terms of how we connect with the different layers of ourselves as well as with those around us, right? And that's also part of that ecosystem, right? Like how we receive and how we give to what's kind of around us. And that's the same like in our business, especially like where we find that balance, right? And how part of that sustainability is then being able to maintain our own nourishment levels while still giving out whatever it is in terms of services or products or whatever it is that we're focused on in our business, right? But how do we find that equilibrium or that balance point for ourselves? And oftentimes, just like I've spoken with so many people who like who perceive balance as like this set point. But
Yes.
that's not at all what balance is. Like the balance point might be here one day and over here the next day. Like,
Yeah.
right? But it's in finding that sustainable flow.
Exactly. Yeah. I like to think of balance. It's not a static thing at all. It's actually like if you're balancing on one foot, right? And this is why I love the combination of things that you have in your business, because it just that the yoga piece of it, right? Like brings in that embodiment of being able to actually understand something through your somatic experience. And when you're trying to balance on one foot, right, you're constantly moving to adjust different forces that are happening internally and externally, right? Like gravity is working and your mind is working and there are all these different things. Your muscles are getting fatigued. And so you have to keep doing these subtle adjustments to get back into that point of balance. But you're right, it can move around. And so I like to think of it also as like a seesaw. And if you have a seesaw and you have, certain things on one side and certain things on the other side, if you want it to actually become balanced, you may need to move something off of one side or, put it on the other side, because the things that are on either side of those, they're not necessarily the same. Maybe on one side you have watermelons and those represent your home life, right? And on the other side you have tiny grains of rice and that may represent your work life or whatever things you're trying to balance out, right? Because it's not just two things. It's not just one thing on one side and one on the other, but for the purpose of this exploration, how do you balance out grains of rice with watermelons, right? Like one is such a tiny piece that can be can make a difference. And then the other, maybe you don't get to choose how many watermelons are on that side, right? Maybe you have to balance out the watermelons with the grains of rice, and those watermelons keep changing without without you getting to choose.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up a balance pose in yoga as an example, right? So most people, if you've ever practiced any form of yoga, you're probably familiar with tree pose, right? And there are three things that I always guide in balances, but especially in tree pose. Like one, it's about finding that rooting. So like really rooting down through your feet. And tree pose is fabulous for this because the deeper your roots grow, the more you have the flexibility to sway in the wind, right? And so I always also guide, like when I see students really wobbling in any kind of balance pose, and have this like super stern, like set jaw, determined look on their face, like because uh, a lot of people can get that way in their practice on the mat and off the mat too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I always say, can you wobble and still get back up into it with a smile or a laugh? Right? Because that's where this intentionality, like the intentional action
Yes.
comes in as well, right? Because if we're feeling really off kilter, do we have something to anchor us back in, and can we do it with gratitude? Can we do it from this place of, okay, like self-compassion essentially, or maybe it's compassion to somebody else if it's involving an external person. But then the other thing too is that came to mind with that example is where we set our vision, our gaze, where we focus is essential in how well we balance, right? And on the mat in a standing balancing pose, I I often cue keep your gaze eye level or higher on a non-moving object, right? So when we stay, but still, like you keep your gaze soft so that
Yeah.
you can take in what's going on around you, yet focused on your goal up ahead. And it's coming into these kind of points where we're taking that intentional action that feeds into the sustainability of what we're building and how we're evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things came to mind when you were saying that. One, that intentional action is not the same as goal setting, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so often in business especially we hear like what is your intention, what is your goal, right? Like, and that's that really narrow focus that you were talking about, that tight jaw, that and I'm not saying goal setting is bad, I'm just saying that do it with an openness, right, with a
Mm-hmm.
flexibility. And so that tight jaw, that like really focused viewpoint of like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, and you're trying to internalize it. And by doing that, if you even notice, like my body is like, like getting
Mm-hmm.
really contracted as I'm saying that. But when I think about like softening my gaze and putting it on something that's like higher up, in the above the horizon even, or right at the horizon line, and is not moving, that it allows me to see all the things that are around me, even being able to see things that are moving but not feel like I'm wobbling, right? And so there's that level of it. And also, intentional action can be like sometimes laughing about it, laughing at yourself, allowing yourself to fall down, allowing yourself to wobble a little bit or put down that extra leg of support for a moment to then be able to recenter and go back into it. That is also intentional action, right?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
and that is sustainable because when you can put that leg down for support, that's what I mean about sustainability, right? Because you're asking for your body, okay, I need a minute. Like, I need to recenter, I need to recalibrate, and then go back into that pose. And that's what creates that ongoing energy and gives you that renewal to keep going.
Yeah.
The other thing that was just really strongly dropping in is I don't know if you've ever explored this or not, but our nervous system is, I mean, our nervous system is so amazing,
Yes.
and so complex too, right?
Yeah.
But there's something that I was reading recently about how when we so there's this whole idea of, does story follow action, or does action follow story? And um, what I mean by that is, we think of oftentimes our sympathetic nervous system as being that fight or flight, right? But also the actions that we do can trigger that fight or flight response in our nervous system. So it's not just something external happens and we go into that state fight, flight, or freeze, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also, when we stay, like if we stay in a frozen state, for instance, if we're staring at a computer screen all day, right, this very narrow focus, similar to what you were talking about with getting off balance in that pose, we can get off balance in our energy or in our life. And our body starts to react like we are in that state because the cues that our nervous system is getting from our actions is actually telling us you're in that state. So by bringing our gaze up away from the computer screen, right, bringing it up actually above the horizon line actually opens up your peripheral vision, and it cues your parasympathetic nervous system to come in and be present. So it's really interesting that we can do that in our bodies physically, but that also we can do that in our work and in our life, right? And that's that intentional action and sustainability in practice.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. It's also very much acknowledging that, you know, before this call, like you and I were talking
Yeah,
about layers of awareness, right?
hmm,
And I want to bring that in here now too, because um, sometimes we have that awareness of how we're responding. I would say, like when something happens and we feel that we're able to respond, then we have that layer of awareness. But if we're reacting to what's happening,
yeah,
either something that we're holding in ourselves or something external, right? Then our awareness point is much smaller because it's a more of a automatic kind of action as
yeah,
opposed to an intentional response, right? And I make that distinction because yes, we absolutely have the power, and this is part of intentionality too, when all of these different layers of our being, in terms of the mental body, the emotional body, all that, like we have the power to make these like huge transformational shifts, but it is not always easy, and it takes lots, and it often feels horrible in the process, and it takes lots and lots of layers of awareness, right? And so I say that because from a conflict transformation perspective, right, it is that intentional action in terms of like getting back up and like facing the shadow, like creating that space, holding that space, and dealing with the discomfort in order to take those small baby steps through and really coming back to your grounded practice in order to, and that practice of mindful awareness as well, in order to begin to slowly start to shift something. So it's not always so easy as, okay, I know I can shift it. I mean, sometimes it is. And we absolutely have tools to be able to do that. Sometimes it takes a lot of practice and it feels really crappy in the process.
yeah, it does. Um, and this is really why, so, we're having this conversation because LaChelle and I are both going to be supporting a program called The Missing Link. And we're actually going to run that program starting in May. And the program itself is within a container that goes through many layers of awareness, many layers of your experience within your business. And it really is to help you to create a sustainable ecosystem within your business and within your life, because really they're not separate things. They are the same thing, right? Especially as an entrepreneur, our work is an expression of who we are, and we are present at all times with our business and with our life. So you can't really separate those two things. And this program goes through multiple layers. It actually starts with layers of awareness and expanding our awareness into multiple layers of influence so that we can practice doing that in a very specific way and then weave that throughout all that we do. Right. And you are supporting LaChelle Module 7, which is intentional action and sustainability. And know that we don't get to that part until way towards the end of the program because we have to build the structure for that first. We have to tune in and align energetically with all of these layers of the pieces of our business and the pieces of our life and the pieces of who we are and how we show up. And Yeah, so it's this really it's a beautiful container that weaves everything in, and you leave that program with an awareness of what an ecosystem that's sustainable and nourishing and beneficial to you on all layers can look like, so that you're putting that into practice. But we were talking about this before too, that you're not going to walk out of this program with that fully integrated into your life and business, because it's a process that is
Yeah.
ongoing, right?
Yeah. And I would add to it as well, like in addition to having kind of that deepened framework, you're leaving this, like you're finishing up this program with depth of connection
Mm,
with yourself, with the energy of your business, with other like-minded,
yes.
soul-led entrepreneurs, right? Soulpreneurs, as Regina says. So, excuse me. So it's also that deepened connection, which is a part of the ecosystem too, right? A
Yes,
sustainable
absolutely.
ecosystem has those connections, right? And that's also part of the support. That's also immensely important in order to be sustainable.
It is. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about this for days, because
Yeah.
there's so much in there. And yes, the support is a huge part of it. Even before, like right before we got on the call, we were talking about how trees, and even like the fungal systems that function within different ecosystems are such an important part of keeping the sustainability and the creating a thriving environment, or the opportunity to thrive within an environment. So there's so many pieces in here, and that brings me into, like, that's layer 2 of cycles and rhythms and how we connect with nature. And um, yeah, there's so many exciting things to explore. And like I said, we're going to be starting that program in May. So we have, I'll drop the link in here. It's called The Missing Link. And LaChelle, I think you'll put it on your
I
site
will.
as well,
Yeah.
so you can check that out. So today is just a taste of what we're going to be talking about. And if you're interested in exploring these topics further, definitely reach out and we can discuss that as well. So thank
Yeah.
you, LaChelle, for being here. Any last words
Thank
that
you,
you want to
Regina.
share?
No, just to say, if any of this resonated with you, watching, whether live or in a replay, please feel free to reach out to Regina or I, and we would be happy to discuss further. Because as you can see, there are so many fun little tangents that go off of this conversation.
There definitely are. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's watching, and we'll be in touch.